Remember those nights? The glow of the TV washing over your face at 2 a.m. as you traveled through wormholes and alien worlds? That feeling when you discovered a show nobody at school was talking about, but you just knew, it was something special. I've been on a serious nostalgia kick lately, digging through dusty DVD box sets in my parents' basement. And man, there were some incredible space shows that never got the love they deserved. Shows that shaped how I see the universe, with characters that felt like friends.
What have you done?
What do you mean?
The coding wall, it's dimming.
The control collar.
If you're into discovering hidden gems like I am, smash that subscribe button. The algorithm doesn't always surface the good stuff, so we gotta stick together. You know what's funny about these forgotten space shows? They were often way more creative than the mainstream hits. Less budget meant more imagination, practical effects that somehow feel more real than today's perfect CGI. So let's take a journey through the stars to rediscover 8 incredible space adventures that time forgot. I promise at least one of these is gonna be your next obsession. Farscape, 1999 to 2003. You ever watch something and think, how is everyone not talking about this? That was Farscape for me. I stumbled across it one Friday night when my parents thought I was asleep. This American astronaut, John Crichton, gets sucked through a wormhole and ends up on this living ship with the most incredible aliens I'd ever seen. And these weren't just guys with forehead bumps. They were these amazing puppets from Jim Henson's company. There was Rigel, this little floating slug thing who was actually a deposed emperor. And Pilot, this massive four-armed creature physically bonded to the ship. They felt so real to me. The thing about Farscape was how wild it got. One episode, Crichton would be cracking jokes. The next, he'd be losing his mind, talking to an alien in his head. The romance between him and this leather-clad warrior woman, Aaron's son. Man, that hit different than the sterile relationships on other space shows. I remember rewatching it in college with my roommate, and we'd stay up debating which character was the best until our RA would bang on the door to shut us up. The show went places other sci-fi was afraid to go. It was messy, emotional, sometimes uncomfortable. What kills me is how they canceled it on a massive cliffhanger. We had to fight for years to get the Peacekeeper Wars miniseries to wrap it up. If you've never given Farscape a chance, you're missing out on something truly special. It's the definition of lightning in a bottle. I still have this battered Farscape poster hanging in my office, all yellowed and creased from moving apartments like 5 times. People always ask about it, and I end up talking their ear off for an hour. The show taught me that space stories could be dirty and complicated and funny all at once. Remember that episode where Crichton got split into 2 identical versions of himself? Or when the entire crew swapped bodies? They took these sci-fi tropes and twisted them into something completely fresh. The soundtrack, too, those weird alien instruments and percussion that would play during tense moments. I actually hunted down the composer's work years later because those sounds were burned into my brain. Farscape wasn't just a show I watched. It was a place I lived in once a week, this bizarre, beautiful universe that felt dangerous and wonderful all at once. Space Above and Beyond, 1995 to 1996. Remember that weird period in the mid-90s when the X-Files had networks scrambling to make sci-fi shows? That's when this military space drama snuck onto Fox for just one perfect season before vanishing like a ghost. I caught Space Above and Beyond purely by accident. My dad was flipping channels one night, and we landed on these space fighter pilots battling these aliens called Chigs. We just stopped and watched, completely hooked. This wasn't your typical heroes in space story. These Marines, the 58th Squadron, the Wild Cards, were so damaged and real. There was Cooper, an in vitro, born in a tank, facing constant discrimination. Shane, haunted by her boyfriend's death. And Nathan, this by-the-book guy, slowly unraveling as the war got worse. The space battles felt gritty and dangerous, more like World War II dogfights than Star Wars. The cockpit scenes were claustrophobic, all these red emergency lights reflecting off sweaty faces as they careened through asteroid fields. I still remember the sound design. The metallic groans of their ships taking damage stuck with me for years. What gets me is how the show balanced huge war storylines with these intimate character moments. One episode would be this massive battle. The next would be about McQueen, their commanding officer with the synthetic leg, confronting his loneliness. When it got canceled, I was gutted. They managed to wrap up some storylines, but you could tell they had years of story planned. 25 episodes that deserved so much more. But maybe that's why it feels so special to those of us who found it. I actually tracked down the show on DVD years later at this sketchy little media store that was going out of business. Paid way too much, but it was worth every penny. The practical effects hold up surprisingly well. Those hammerhead fighters still look cool, and the space carrier Saratoga feels like a real, working military vessel, all narrow corridors and functional design. What really sticks with me is how the show dealt with the dehumanization of war. There's this episode where they find this half-human, half-Chig hybrid, and it forces them to question everything they've been told about the enemy. It was tackling complex moral issues that most military sci-fi wouldn't touch until Battlestar Galactica came along almost a decade later. This show was so ahead of its time, and I'll never stop being mad that it didn't get the 4 or 5 seasons it deserved. Babylon 5, 1993 to 1998. When I talk about Babylon 5, I get this weird defensiveness, like, how is this show underrated when it's literally got such a devoted fan base? But then I realize most people I meet have never watched it, and that's just wrong. I was probably too young when I first discovered B5 on late-night reruns, this massive space station where humans and aliens tried to keep peace in the galaxy. But unlike Star Trek, where everything was solved in an hour, Babylon 5 told one massive story across 5 years. Creator J. Michael Straczynski had the whole thing planned out from the beginning. Who does that? The first season feels clunky now. The hair and uniforms are pure 90s awkwardness. But man, by season 2, when the Shadow War starts brewing and Commander Sheridan arrives, I was sneaking downstairs every night to watch more episodes on our old CRT TV with the volume turned way down. Remember in the comments what character you'd want to have a drink with at the Zocalo. For me, it's always been G'Kar. Started as this angry Narn ambassador and ended up being this profound spiritual leader. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, hit that subscribe button. I've got so many more obscure sci-fi shows to share with you. I actually met Peter Jurasik, who played Londo Mollari, at this tiny con years ago. There were maybe 30 people in the room for his panel, but he performed like he was on Broadway, full Centauri accent, telling these incredible behind-the-scenes stories. That's the kind of passion this show inspired, both in its cast and its fans. What really set B5 apart was how it handled politics and religion. Remember the Minbari Civil War? Or the Earth government slowly turning fascist? This was heavy stuff, exploring how democracies fall and how good people can be manipulated into supporting terrible things. I was way too young to fully grasp it at the time, but rewatching as an adult, I'm blown away by how prescient it was. And the character arcs, Londo and G'Kar starting as bitter enemies and ending as the closest of friends, may be the most beautiful character evolution in any TV show ever. When G'Kar forgives Londo after everything he did to the Narn people, I still tear up thinking about it. B5 understood that real growth takes years, not episodes, and they had the patience to let these transformations unfold naturally. Lex, 1997 to 2002. Has a show ever made you feel like you're having a fever dream? That's Lex, this bizarre Canadian-German production about a giant dragonfly-shaped ship that eats planets. Yes, you heard that right. I discovered Lex at a sleepover when my friend's older brother was watching it. We were supposed to be asleep, but instead watched wide-eyed as this crew of misfits, an undead assassin, a love slave, a security guard with low self-esteem, and a robot head, traveled through the dark zone on this living ship. The show was horny and weird in a way that American sci-fi never dared to be. Everything had this biomechanical look, all fleshy and uncomfortable. The planets they visited were completely insane, like the 2 planets Fire and Water orbiting each other, ruled by drastically different societies. Which brings me to my question for you. What's the weirdest sci-fi show you've ever watched that actually blew your mind? Drop it in the comments because I'm always looking for my next bizarre obsession. Lex wasn't for everyone. It was gross, sexual, and sometimes barely made sense. But that's why it stuck with me for decades when so many better shows have faded from memory. Sometimes the strange ones leave the deepest impression. I remember trying to explain the plot to my girlfriend years later, and just giving up halfway through because it sounded absolutely insane coming out of my mouth. So there's this giant bug ship, right? And it's piloted by this guy named Stanley Tweedle, who accidentally got the key to the most powerful weapon in the universe. And his crew includes a woman named Zev, who was partially transformed into a love slave, but the process got interrupted when a cluster lizard escaped. And the visual aesthetic of Lex is something that's never been duplicated. All these organic, vaguely sexual designs for everything from the ship to the weapons. Those protein regeneration tubes they slept in that looked like cocoons. The way his divine shadow's brain would possess people. The Giga Shadow metamorphosis. It was like H.R. Geiger and David Cronenberg had a baby that was raised by Monty Python. I still occasionally rewatch random episodes just to make sure I didn't hallucinate the whole thing. No other show has had the audacity to be this unapologetically weird while still maintaining this twisted internal logic to its universe. Stargate Atlantis, 2004 to 2009. Everyone always talks about SG-1, right? But Atlantis? This was the cool younger sibling that deserves way more credit. I remember rushing home from school to catch the latest episode, dropping my backpack at the door and racing to the TV. The premise itself was so compelling. An ancient city ship in another galaxy, cut off from Earth, with a team of scientists and military personnel trying to survive. And those Wraith villains? I had actual nightmares about them. These space vampires that could suck the life out of you with their hands, way scarier than the Goa'uld from the original series. The team chemistry was what made this show special, though. Shepard with his laid-back attitude but secret math genius brain. McKay being simultaneously the most annoying and most lovable character with his hypochondria and massive ego. And don't get me started on Ronan Dex, Jason Momoa before he was Aquaman, just being an absolute badass with that energy weapon and those dreadlocks. Hey, if you're enjoying this trip through the stars with me, now would be an awesome time to hit that subscribe button. I do these deep dives into forgotten sci-fi regularly, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. What I miss most about Atlantis was how it balanced humor with genuine tension. One minute you'd be laughing at McKay's antics, the next you'd be on the edge of your seat as the shield was failing and the ocean was about to crush them all. They just don't make space shows with that perfect blend anymore. Space 1999, 1975 to 1977. Okay, I'm showing my age a bit here, but I first caught Space 1999 during late-night reruns when I was supposed to be in bed. This show was from the 70s, but something about it felt timeless, even with those bell-bottom uniforms and shaggy haircuts. The premise still gives me chills. The moon gets blasted out of Earth's orbit by a nuclear explosion and just drifts through space with Moonbase Alpha and all its crew along for the ride. No warp drives, no fancy tech, just humans stranded on a wandering rock, confronting the vast unknown universe with limited resources. Those Eagle spacecraft? The models they used looked so real, way more tactile than CGI. I remember the distinctive sound they made, this low, rumbling hum that meant adventure was coming. My cousin and I built Eagles out of Lego blocks and spent hours recreating episodes in my basement, arguing over who got to be Commander Koenig. There was something so eerie about Commander Koenig and Dr. Russell facing these cosmic mysteries, like that episode with the Black Sun, or the one with those aliens who lived on accelerated time. The show wasn't afraid to get philosophical or downright strange, leaving questions unanswered in a way that haunted my dreams. What show from before you were born left a mark on you? Drop it in the comments. I love discovering classics through other people's eyes. Andromeda, 2000 to 2005. When people talk about Gene Roddenberry shows, they always mention Star Trek. But Andromeda? Based on his notes but produced after his death, this show had so much untapped potential. exploring themes of rebuilding civilization that resonated differently than Trek's established utopia. I watched Andromeda religiously in high school, even set up the VCR to record episodes when I had basketball practice. Kevin Sorbo as Captain Dylan Hunt, frozen in time at the edge of a black hole, waking up 300 years later to find the Commonwealth had fallen? Such a cool setup for weekly adventures across a fractured galaxy. The ship's AI having multiple forms, a hologram, a screen image, and an android body, was ahead of its time. And let's talk about Tyr Anasazi, this genetically engineered super soldier with bone blades coming out of his forearms. Everything about him screamed cool to teenage me, with his Nietzschean philosophy and complicated loyalty. The show definitely lost its way in later seasons, but those first 2 years had some of the most interesting world building in sci-fi. The Magog world ship was genuinely terrifying. A massive construct of interconnected planets harboring these savage aliens that gave me legitimate nightmares about parasitic creatures. Cowboy Bebop, 1998. See you, space cowboy. Just typing that phrase gives me goosebumps. This anime series was only 26 episodes, but each one felt like a perfectly crafted film. I first discovered it on Adult Swim way past my bedtime, and the opening theme, that jazz sequence, instantly had me hooked, fingers drumming along to Tank on my bedroom floor. The bounty hunters of the Bebop, Spike, Jet, Faye, Ed, and Ain the data dog, felt like real people carrying real baggage. They were just trying to make enough woolongs for their next meal while running from their pasts, creating this found family that somehow felt more authentic than most live-action shows. What other show mixed space battles, film noir, westerns, and kung fu so seamlessly? The episode Mushroom Samba had me literally rolling on the floor laughing, while the Real Folk Blues two-parter left me staring at the ceiling, processing what I'd just witnessed, wondering if I'd ever see storytelling that perfect again. Remember what it was like watching something so unique that you couldn't wait to tell your friends, but also wanted to keep it as your own secret discovery? That was Bebop for me. Pure lightning in a bottle that never overstayed its welcome, leaving an ache of melancholy satisfaction that no other show has matched since.